Now, the blessing of the energy centers meditation has become one of the most popular meditations for the advancing community because they can do it so well, because unbeknownst to them, at the beginning of entering this work, I asked them to go through this process of an induction. And induction meaning being able to change your state, or to induce a state where you can begin to change your brainwaves. And so I asked people at the beginning of this work to become aware of the space that their nose occupies in space, and to sense the space their nose is in space. And what they're doing is they're putting their attention on matter, on the material world, and they're narrowing their focus on something physical. And that type of focus is called a convergent focus. Now, most people in the world have been conditioned to narrow their focus on the material world, and primarily we do that when we're in emergency. And our parents actually instruct us this way. Tie your shoe, wash the car, pay attention to the stairs. And the alert, the alarm causes us to wake up. The arousal causes a release of adrenaline, and we narrow our focus, and that arousal causes us to pay attention to our outer world a little bit more, and brainwaves pick up, and you're more alert. How many people understand? And is it possible then that if you do this over and over again, you begin to habituate, and all you see is the material world? And in the material world, we're fooled into the illusion of separation. There's you there and there's me here, and I'm separate from everything in the material world. And if I'm local in space and time, then I have to play by the rules of Newtonian physics. I got to play by the rules of three-dimensional reality. And the things that I create, even if I want to heal my body or create balance in my body, is going to take a certain amount of time. How many people understand? And by doing this, the arousal that's created by the stress hormones causes a person to step from the known into the unknown. And in the unknown, when they're in stress, they try to predict an outcome. They try to force an outcome. They try to control an outcome. They try to forecast an outcome based on their memory bank of the past. So then, the moment the person's in an aroused state and they're in survival, they prepare for the worst. And what they're thinking about is all the people, all the objects, all the things, everything material, all the places in their external world. And by trying to control them, what they're doing is they're putting their attention on all those things as quickly as possible to keep their awareness on everything known. How many people understand? Now, the effect of that, and we've measured this numerous times, is the brain begins to compartmentalize. The neocortex, the thinking brain, begins to become a house divided against itself. It begins to subdivide, and it begins to produce very incoherent brainwave patterns. Now, incoherence is a lack of order and a lack of rhythm. And those very stress hormones cause us to really overanalyze everything in our life. And we're trying to predict the future based on the past. We're analyzing our world in terms of good and bad, right and wrong. And the analytical and the critical facilities go into high gear. And the brain moves into those very high brainwave patterns called beta brainwave patterns. Now, that incoherence sends a very incoherent signal down the central nervous system, and we have little different circuit boards, little breaker boards that are called energy centers. Now, they've been called chakras and all other kinds of names, but we're using the word energy center because it's more contemporary. Are you with me still? So then each one of these energy centers are under the control of the autonomic nervous system. And autonomic means automatic. It's that nervous system that's digesting food. It's making hormones. It's regulating body temperature, blood sugar levels. It's that part of the body that's giving us life. And it's not under the control of the thinking brain. It's under the control of the limbic brain that sits right underneath the thinking neocortex, the seat of the identity, the known self, the autobiographical self. How many people understand? So then, when we started teaching people how to induce a state of change in brain waves from beta to alpha, I ask them to rest their attention on different parts of their body and become aware of the space around their body. Now, reality is both particle and wave, matter and energy. But if we're only focusing on matter, now we omit a very large part of the rest of reality. So then when I said become aware of the space around your head in space, we got a lot of emails saying, what is he talking about? Space. I don't understand. Because people didn't have the hardware in place to understand that all they had to do is, if they had their hands out like this, sense that space and go from a convergent focus to a divergent focus. And it's the act of broadening your focus, opening your focus. The Buddhists have been doing this for thousands of years. As you begin to sense nothing, space, energy, and take your attention off of everything material, the act of sensing stops you from thinking. And if you're no longer thinking, you begin to slow your brain waves down from beta to alpha, and you stop analyzing. And when you stop analyzing, you stop activating those individual neurological networks that are assigned to everything known in your life. Every person, every object, everything, every place, every past experience. And we begin to silence the mechanism of the thinking neocortex. How many people are with me? And brain waves then begin to slow down from high-range beta to mid-range beta to low-level beta, and we start crossing the analytical mind, and we move into alpha. Now, in alpha, those slower brainwave patterns allow us to suppress the thinking brain, and we tend to now, instead of hearing the voice in our head that's always talking to us, the brain starts to see in pictures, in images. It's a more creative, imaginary state. How many people are still with me? And most people then, when they're in high beta, they use an exogenous or external substance to mediate or change that. They'll use an antidepressant, they'll gamble, they'll do something, they'll overeat, they'll undereat, they'll drink, they'll do something to suppress or sedate the neocortex. The problem with that is every time they feel anxiety, every time they feel frustration, every time they feel fear, every time they feel unworthiness, their brain automatically creates the image of what took it away the last time. Because the moment they notice a change in their internal state from something that they're using outside of them, they pay attention to the cause. And now they're conditioning their body to become reliant on something. So every time they start feeling that imbalance, the body is looking for something outside of them to make it go away. The problem is that that chemistry is only temporary, that there's no real permanent fix. How many people are with me still? So then, if there's incoherence in this brain and it's sending an incoherent message down the central nervous system, it begins to have an effect autonomically on every one of these circuit boards, every one of these energy centers. And every one of these energy centers are centers of information. They have their own energy. And energy is frequency, and frequency carries information. They have their own intent. They have their own consciousness. They have their own glands, their own hormones, the secretion of certain chemicals, and they have their own individual mini brains, plexuses of neurons that are controlling different parts of the body. How many people understand? So does it make sense then when the brain starts firing incoherently and it sends an incoherent message down the central nervous system? It's going to create incoherence in each one of these centers, and those centers are going to send an incoherent message to the cells and tissues and organs in that part of the body, and that person will experience some dis-ease or imbalance. How many people understand? Now, when you go from a narrow focus to a broad focus and you open your awareness, the training that we did in teaching people how to do this, mastering a convergent focus and a divergent focus, if I taught the blessing of the energy centers before you develop this skill, and I asked you to rest your attention or your awareness in your first center and become aware of the space around it, you would say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And you would get very little effects, or you would produce very little change because you wouldn't understand what you were doing. Yes or no? But if we built that model and you can rest your attention in different parts of your body and become aware of the space around it, it was preparation It was training for the blessing of the energy centers. By the same means, if you don't know how to change your brain waves and go from beta brain waves into alpha, into high level or low level theta, you're separate from the operating system. You're separated from the autonomic nervous system, where you can begin to plant the seed for true change. And if you're trying to do it in your thinking neocortex, trying represents separation. So you try harder, you force hard, you do everything you can to make the change, but that's the habit of how we've done everything in our lives. Are you with me still? So then as consciousness falls out of the thinking neocortex, we've measured this thousands of times when the person is truly self-regulating, as they slow their brain waves down out of their thinking neocortex, consciousness is falling literally in the autonomic nervous system, right into the midbrain, the limbic brain, and that area of the brain on our scans gets very hot. There's more energy in there. Now, they're conscious in their subconscious mind, and they can begin to program their autonomic nervous system to change. How many people understand that? So then if you create coherence in this brain, then it makes sense then, if you rest your attention in each one of these energy centers, where you place your attention is where you place your energy. That's your target. You're focusing on matter, but now it has a field, it has an energy. But if you're living every single day in survival and you're over-consuming, you're overstressed, you're over-sexual, whatever it is, and you're depleting all your body's vital resources and turning it into chemistry, these centers are energy consumers, then you're going to have very little energy in those centers and very little energy to heal. How many people understand? So now what we're doing is we're raising the temple. We are resting our attention in each one of these centers. That's our target. And as we place our attention in each one of these centers, we're bringing these centers to life with our awareness. We're giving these centers our energy. And when we place our attention there and we become aware of the space around each one of these centers, particle, wave, matter, energy, if you can tune in to each one of these frequencies and not feel it from your brain, but feel it from each one of these little plexuses, these mini brains, you could create coherence in each one of these energy centers. Are you with me still? And when you create coherence in each one of these energy centers, there's an organized, coherent, clear signal to the cells and tissues and organs in that part of the body. And as we move to each one of these energy centers and become aware of the space around them, the blessing, the awareness on each one of these centers and tuning into them causes these centers to receive that frequency and create coherence. And we begin to align each one of these centers back into metabolic balance. And we have seen people heal from all kinds of health conditions, from rectal cancer to colon cancer to prostate cancer to enlarged prostates to impotence to diverticulitis to tumors in the abdomen, tumors in the ovaries, tumors in the uterus. We've seen people heal from acid reflux, high liver enzymes, problems with their spleen, heart palpitations, arrhythmias, asthma, high thyroid enzymes, hormones, low thyroid hormones, brain tumors. We've seen people heal just by blessing each one of these energy centers. And we don't have to spend a lot of time on each one of these centers when you lock in. Because once you lock in and you feel that frequency and you can receive, now you're causing order in each one of these centers, and we can move to the next one. And each center has a faster frequency than the previous center. How many people are with me still so far? Is this making sense? So then, when energy moves into each one of these centers, when you have a thought about something, a thought produces a frequency or an energy, and that thought also produces a chemical. Yes or no? And that chemical then is a signal that's coming from the brain. You have a set of thoughts in your brain that produce a level of mind, and when you fire thoughts in your brain, you release neurotransmitters. Yes or no? And neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that begin to activate different systems in the thinking neocortex, and different neurochemicals or neurotransmitters have different assignments. So then as a person fires different thoughts and they produce a level of mind, if they get enough circuits firing with that thought, it signals the limbic brain to automatically begin to release neuropeptides. And neuropeptides are the chemical messengers that begin to signal each one of these hormonal centers. Are you with me still? So we're taking thought as an etherical thing producing a chemical, which is matter, and it's assigning or signaling each one of the hormonal centers, and we do that properly, there's energy that begins to activate each one of these centers. And once energy moves into each one of these centers, energy and neurological tissue creates mind. So then when you activate your first center because you're having a fantasy or having a thought about something that's sexual, the signal that's going to that center is causing energy to move there, and when it moves there, that center has an assignment. It has its own mind. Yes or no? So then, if you're in your heart, and there's energy truly in your heart, then you trust, you love, you give, you serve, you care, you know, you're grateful. And it has a different signature, a different energy when this center is activated. Yes or no? Yes. So each one of these centers, once there's the proper energy in there, produces a level of mind. And what we want to do then is we want to activate these centers so they're filled with energy. So then you have an enormous amount of energy that sits in your first center. That's creative energy. And most cultures believe there's only one way to release that energy, and that's out. But when we understand that that energy we can use to create, that is creative energy, that is the very life force, what happens is when energy moves to the second center, we feel safe in our environment. And the safety and the security of social networks, of food, of shelter, of home, of everything where we feel safe in our environment allows us to consume, metabolize, assimilate, eliminate, and have our metabolic functions in balance. Are you with me still? When we're out of balance in safety and security and we feel threatened, this center moves out of balance. When the conditions in our environment challenge us, or there's adversity in our outer world, energy has to move into this center, and we have to use our will or our empowerment to overcome the conditions in the environment. If we're able to overcome the conditions in our environment, then we feel more love for ourselves, we feel more whole, and energy moves into this center. Are you with me still? Now, once it moves into this center, we know from our research and others' research that once it makes it here, which direction does it go? So it naturally is going to cross through here and move right to the brain, and as it passes up into your throat, if your heart is swollen with love, you got to express it. You can't not express it. So we express our greatest understanding through the center. And if we're lucky enough to articulate it really well and understand our greatest learning, our greatest truth, energy moves right into the sixth center. And that center is responsible for removing the veil, the illusion of the way we perceive the world. Some conditioning is released, and now we can see things the way they really are. And now we're no longer seeing reality through a veil, through an illusion. If that energy makes it to the seventh center, then all of a sudden now, the pineal gland turns on, and now it's a radio receiver, and we begin to organize coherent light, information, and the pituitary begins to create more harmony, releasing more orderly neuropeptides to these hormonal centers, and now the body is getting an upgrade. How many people understand? And if it makes it all the way above to the top of the head, energy is released out into the field, and now we are ready to receive or download information from the field. That's evolution. So then when we bless these energy centers, we have gone through several different meditations to teach people how to evolve their understanding of the blessing of the energy centers. You got it? Turn the person next to you and explain that. Come on, you can do this.